imagine that they had any kind of hyper-palatable food that was driving obesity, or that the mothers were in effect eating chocolate bars and Snickers bars that they could give their kids to stay alive. Beginning even with the Pima in 1902, who had high levels of obesity, particularly in the women, and had gone through 20 to 30 years of famine prior to that. How would your theory explain obesity in those populations, particularly obese mothers with starving, malnourished children?
Okay, well, I think to make any serious consideration of the reward value of a diet, you have to look at it in a considerable level of detail. But the Pima in particular, I mean, their diet went from one that was very low in sugar to very high in sugar. Sugar was one of their main sources of calories. And things like fry bread also became a major source of calories. So you're going from a more natural type of food base of beans and grains and squash to one that is more homogeneous, very easy to eat large amounts, has this combination of high calorie density, starch, and fat. Yeah.
Well, okay, then let's say we now have two hypotheses. One is that we add sugar to the diet, and again, these people, there's a lot of malnutrition. If the mother's obese and the child's starving, we could assume that the mother isn't rewarding herself. But now we have another hypothesis, which is maybe the sugar and the refined carbohydrates in the diet changes the hormonal regulation of the fat tissue, a theory that I personally like a lot. Most of the observations you gave, even the non-palatable liquid diets would be diets that didn't have sugar in them, because if they had sugar in them, they'd be palatable. So we need an observation that could refute one of the two hypotheses.
Sure.
I would argue
so
that
if it helps, the bland liquid diet in that initial study that I presented contained a fairly high proportion of sugar.
How was it bland then?
Well, it was bland compared to their typical diet. I didn't say it was completely lacking in reward factors.
Okay, and now the other populations, like Mexican Americans in 1981, working on the, Starr County, Texas, with one restaurant in town, in the county. Again, there's a lot of observations where you have to somehow imply that somehow the food has become more palatable. And in becoming more palatable, again, you're changing the nutrient composition. Even when you talk about the caloric increase, as you point out, you've changed the nutrient. Most of that caloric increase is carbohydrates and sugar, or high fructose corn syrup in particular.
Well, it depends on the group. Some had increases in carbohydrates, some had decreases, and they all saw increases in obesity. So I think that's a difficult supposition to defend. However, I'm not claiming that reward is the only factor. I think it's an important factor. But, again, to consider how the reward changed in any particular diet, I'd have to see it in detail. So I don't know how the diet of those Mexican populations that you're referring to changed. So I can't really speak to that.
Okay, I would just recommend in the future you should pay attention to populations that might refute your hypothesis rather than just present populations that support it. That's always key in science.
Thank you for the advice.
Ooh.